A very warm welcome to this WWEA webinar on the role of certificates for promoting the deployment of renewable energy. It's my great pleasure that we can welcome really high caliber speakers, experts on this. And before we start, let me kind of start with some housekeeping rules. This webinar will be broadcasted live on Facebook. We will also we're recording the webinar, and it will be later published on YouTube. So whenever you say something, whenever you raise your hand, also those in the audience, please be aware it's in general a public event. So those who are not speaking, I request you to stay muted to kind of avoid disturbing noise in the background. Otherwise, those in the audience, if you have any questions, please raise your hand or write in the chat, and then we can come back to you. Yeah, the topic we're talking about today is an important topic, the role of certificates in renewable energy, although it's not at the moment in the center of the public debate. Of course, at the moment, people are discussing a lot about the development of energy prices, electricity prices, and renewables, what their contribution could be to bring the prices down, or is actually to bring the prices down. Some of you may remember that the topic of certificates was a very hot topic more than 20 years ago, when in particular in Europe, there was a big debate about what would be the main promotion scheme for renewable power in particular, feed-in tariff versus, at that time, it was like quota-based certificate scheme. At that time, the kind of outcome was more or less clear. Feed-in tariff won against as a financial support scheme in most countries around the world. Now the situation is quite different in terms of the support schemes. I think auctions are now more or less the main political instrument for new investment, but certificates are playing a different role. And that's what we want to talk about today. What's the role and which kind of certificates do we have, by the way? So there are different ways of guarantees of origin, renewable energy certificates, tradable or not. We have different angles represented here, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all. And I would like to invite as the first speaker an expert from Europe, from the European Renewable Energy Foundation, Dr. Dörte Fouquet. It's my great pleasure. Your education, your main background is that you are a lawyer, so you are the perfect person to explain us what is the situation of renewable energy certificates in the European Union. Dörte, the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you, lieber Stefan. It's always a big pleasure to be with the WWEA, and I think your subject today on the certificate trading issues comes at a very good point in time. And my role is to, as I understood it, but tell me if I'm an idiot, to talk a bit, some slides on the background, what's the European setting. Maybe the first slide is the slide Rex people would use. If you go further, next slide is, and that is how the good Rex world looks like. We all know this quite some time. The essence here is also of one of their of the standard publications on the next slide is also just what it's about, that there is a renewable energy company, that there is a renewable energy certificate, which is sold by people who operate renewable energy electricity generation, and that the certificate is the guarantee or the evidence that there has been a certain output of this electricity from that generator. And but then comes the snack. We all know that then business purchase these titles, these paper, to as a proof that their electricity portfolio is entirely or overwhelmingly or at parts stemming from via the certificates from renewable energies. And so the energy electricity use they have, then earmark part of it as being renewable, even if there is no electron from renewable electricity which arrived at that doorstep, or not necessarily. And then the accounting standards, they tried the difficult thing to at least give some honesty on these titles and on the paper. For that we have standards, but I don't go into them. The EU framework on the next slide is an agonizing story of the gate crushers of the renewable energy certificate system, and actually it was introduced. It had already been, certificate mechanisms were already in place in some member states at the end of the 90s of last century, especially in Ireland at that time, and also in the UK it came up. Also Sweden started to think about it, and that was one thing. The other thing was that, and I come back in the conclusions, but from the beginning it was meant to tell the renewable energy producers and member states which supported renewable energy production already at that time. You know them all: Spain, Italy, Denmark, Germany, and so forth, the Austria, that they should not do the mechanisms they have had in place already or thought about, but that they should only do mechanisms which are based on a certificate rate. And there were several pathways, if who should be the purchaser of these certificates. But the main issue was really to come up with one harmonized support mechanism, and this harmonized support mechanism should be certificate based. We fought hard. That's the reason actually why EREF, why the European Renewable Energies Federation, came into being, because national member states associations for renewables grouped together and said we cannot let that go. We need to keep our, at least the choice of member states for the adequate system support mechanism. And that we then got into the electricity directive, but we also got the certificate mechanism into the directive. And this, since then, it stayed where it was. It is in the Renewable Energy Directive from 2009. It's in the current one. And we also have it on the table, even in a way that you cannot even not have it under the RED 3 consideration. So that is the framework, which is really in itself fossil, because it becomes in our times, with more uptake of renewables and with the easier access to renewable energy, also via special purchase agreements, for example, for industry, it becomes more and more a hindrance than has no value proposition left, if it ever had. So when we go to the next slide, reality check, escapists rather than system change enablers. That's what I would say. It's what we in German say, it has been a Mogelpackung. Sorry, my dog is just eating something. It has been a Mogelpackung. It has been something which is not real from day one. And you can see here, this study gets a lot of attention recently, which is good, but I think it gets so much attention because more and more also the corporate sector recognizes that they can no longer continue greenwashing, or that greenwashing is not helping them with energy security. And we all have to struggle with that at present time, so they also. So this is a study published in Natural Climate Change. And what they did was very interesting, very logic. They looked into the corporate emission bookkeeping, so to say, and looked in the purchase of electricity. And then they deduced from the purchase of electricity the RECs accounting. And without the RECs accounting, the emissions with RECs, the emission fell by only 10%. So the pollution reduction is only on paper. And there's S&P Global, which is really not the most progressive lefty cooperative renewable energy magazine. And they said that this was net zero targets, but that does only mean that the efforts to cut emission and to fight climate change via this disguise under the RECs were not taken on board. And I think that is very interesting, because we have thought as renewable energy industry for decades now that this thing is not helping us. But now, since Bloomberg, S&P Global are coming in, there might be a chance that people recognize Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale title, The Emperor Without Clothes, is here. So, as I said, concluding maybe for this introduction, and I can come back on several points. So RECs never delivered any concrete increase of production and linked use of renewable energy. I still think it's a neoliberal approach in the EC, which had its high times in the 90s and in many national economies, and that direct power purchase agreements are much more effective nowadays. And that we have this double counting. I did not go into that, but I remember when we had the review of the 2001 directive, especially the Netherlands were very, very, very outspoken in saying here is so much double counting going on from Norwegian hydropower that there's no credibility in the certificate mechanism left. Nonetheless, it remains on board. By the way, Norway is always the most fervent, also behind the screen, supporter and lobbyist for REC certificate mechanism to be upheld. So that's what I would say in the beginning, Stefan. I don't know if I meet what you wanted to do at the outset, or if I should continue.
Yes, I just ask you for your slides. Is that?
No, there is no more. There's
okay. Good. Then, yeah, thank you very much, Dörte. I think that was a very kind of good introduction into what we need to discuss, and in particular explaining a little bit what's been the role of certificates on the European level. And you've already highlighted that obviously there are different functions of certificates. Huh? So we will hear from others. Certification is not necessarily leading to certificates. You've mentioned already the increasing role of PPAs, direct kind of supply of renewable electricity to clients. And I look forward to hearing from our next speakers, not before asking whether there are any questions, to whether anyone has not clearly understood anything that Dörte might explain again. So thank you very much, Dörte, and I'd be pleased if you stay with us so that we can, after all the presentations, have some discussion about what to do with this whole situation. Again, we're just trying now to grab the overall picture, the kind of role certificates in setting targets. On the other hand, kind of guaranteeing that renewables are actually built. So thank you. Then it's my great pleasure to welcome our next speaker. And this is Eva Rausch from Grüner Strom Label. Grüner Strom Label, English is green electricity label. I think the rest explains by itself. Is one of the kind of most ambitious German, I would say, certificate scheme, independent certificate scheme, which has been supported by some of the main or major environmental organizations. Eva, you've been working for the Grüner Strom Label e.V., and I look forward to hearing from you. You want to add credibility to the market for electricity, and it started in 1998. By the way, I was at that time I was kind of involved in setting up the basic structure. Look forward to hear from you now about where this labeling stance, which is, as I understand, mainly focusing still on Germany.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm just gonna share my presentation now. Can you see it now?
Not yet. Yeah, now it's coming.
Oh.
It's there.
Okay, perfect. Yes, thank you really much for the introduction, Mr. Gsänger. And also hello to all the other participants. My name is Eva Rausch, and I work as a coordinator in the certification of Grüner Strom Label. And today I may speak about our criteria for credible green electricity certification. The Association Grüner Strom Label e.V. issues two labels, Grüner Strom and Grünes Gas. And these two labels, as you already said, Mr. Gsänger, are the only labels for green electricity and biogas that are supported and recommended by the leading environmental organizations in Germany, which you can see here. In this presentation, however, I will only go into green electricity certification, as this is my daily field of work. To start with, I would like to address what are we really talking about when we talk about green electricity. Around 1/3 of German households use so-called green electricity, yet in Germany, this is not a protected term and not a quality term in the sense of a generally accepted catalog of criteria or something. And also the certification itself of green electricity is not a subject to any statutory requirements. And what we also know is that a majority of Germans consider environmental protection and the climate change to be very important issues. And also a majority of consumers usually or always pays attention to seals of approval when it comes to their electricity product. So credible green electricity labels therefore should only recommend products that really promote energy transition. In 2021, also the EU Commission published a report in which they examined the options of an EU-wide green label and dealt with how the criteria for such a label would have to be designed in order to be effective for energy transition. And the graphic that you see here is taken from the study. And in the report, a mapping of the already existing green electricity labels in Europe was created. And as you can see here, there are 14 labels only in Germany with the business model of creating transparency for consumers in a really giant amount of green electricity products. But the problem is that through the lack of transparency of the criteria and the procedures, self-certification is possible. And that paves the way for seals of approval developed purely for commercial purpose. The Grüner Strom Label is one of the strictest labels for green electricity in Germany, and even in Europe, which has been confirmed by various publications so far. Here's an example of an article from the German sustainability online magazine Utopia, in which they compared 6 green electricity labels active in Germany and give the Grüner Strom Label the top rating of highly recommended. So we really demand the certified products to fulfill like premium requirements in terms of energy transition benefits. And this leads us to the question of criteria green electricity products have to meet in order to really benefit energy transition and to receive our label in the end. In the following, I will give you a brief summary. Basically, our label is a product label and not a supplier label. Nevertheless, the company must meet certain superordinate requirements in order to carry the label for the products. Specifically, these are the Grüner Strom Label is not granted to companies directly involved in nuclear power plants or any company that is still directly involved in a coal-fired power plant on the effective date of January 1st, 2027. Also, the energy suppliers must present information on the certified product in transparent, clear, and understandable ways to their consumers. So now we get into the criteria for the certified products. According to the procurement of electricity, well, of course, the certified green electricity must be supplied from renewable energy sources. But how do we check this origin? Well, energy suppliers have to submit to us the guarantees of origin, which specify the source of the renewable electricity generation. In Germany, these guarantees of origin are issued by the Umweltbundesamt, the German Federal Environmental Agency, where they must be submitted for cancellation also, so that they can no longer be traded. In addition, the electricity to be certified must come from the same power plant that is shown in the guarantee of origin. So the power plant must therefore also be identified in the procurement contract, which they have to submit to us too. And these criteria, of course, apply to the total amount of electrical energy sold in the product. So it is not possible for a label holder to have a remaining amount of gray energy certified. So according to our requirements, the guarantee of origin alone is not sufficient evidence to qualify electricity as green. Furthermore, as of now, there is no evidence that they cause additionality in renewable energy capacities. So certifying green electricity only based on guarantees of origin does not match our vision of a 100% renewable energy system. And instead, as a credible label, we need to promote new renewable generation capacities. And we are not alone with this point of view. Several current studies show that trading guarantees of origin on its own does not lead to an increase in renewable energy capacities. And this confirms once again the importance of the heart of the Grüner Strom Label criteria from the very beginning in 1998, the funding component. For the certified products, energy suppliers have to charge a fixed amount per kilowatt hour of 0.5 cent net and use it for funding energy transition projects. And incidentally, this is also the amount of funding the EU Commission study that I mentioned earlier suggests for an effective green energy label. And the funding options are aimed at expanding a 100% renewable energy system. Energy suppliers can fund energy transition projects in the areas of electricity, heat and transport, infrastructure projects, energy efficiency measures, and if they even charge more than the obligatory funding component, they can also fund nature protection projects. So with this funding component, the label promotes energy transition measures instead of mere trading of guarantees of origin from already existing renewable energy plants. So to close up, I would finally like to show you what has already been achieved through the funding component. Thanks to this high amount of funding per kilowatt hour, so far more than 80 million euros of Grüner Strom grants have been invested in over 1,600 funding projects. And since this funding system of Grüner Strom Label works with grants, behind this investment from the grants, thanks to a leverage factor of 5.5, we speak about a total investment of almost €500 million. So that's it from me. Thank you really much for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to the other interesting inputs and the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eva. And I think this label is indeed well known in Germany. Now we understand, of course, a little bit how this has been done in practice. Very good. Do we have any questions to our speaker before we go to our next speaker? That seems not the case. Then it's my pleasure to welcome our next speaker. Oh, now I see a question here from Muhammad Sheram Alam. Yes, please, if you unmute yourself.
Yes, hello, good evening, everyone. Wonderful to see all the presentations. I'm Muhammad Sheram from Renewables, West Pakistan. I just have a quick comment and questions for Eva and Ms. Dörte. I think the renewable energy certificates would best work if coupled with renewable purchase obligations for the business side and the consumer side as well, mandating a procurement of a minimum amount of renewable energy. Guarantees of origin along as she rightly said in her slides, would only guarantee a paper-based GHG emission reductions. So just a quick comment, and so good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. So I understand it was a comment. Would any of you, Eva, Dörte, like to kind of reply?
I'm sorry, but I really didn't understand it acoustically. But if you like, you can send it in the chat or something, and maybe then I can give my
Yeah, I also had trouble. I think like Eva, I think he, as I understood, he wanted to see if the certificate per se can be more valuable when you have the proof that there is also the renewable electricity arriving. So more really like the system Eva had presented in comparison to the strict certificate trade without any underlying renewable flow.
Mhm.
So, Mohammed, if you're not satisfied with the response, I suggest that you put it down in the chat. In the interest of time, we can come back to that after the other presentations. Thank you for the question as well. And then we go to our next speaker, Stefan Vanholme. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here as well. Stephen, you're the founder, the initiator of EKOenergy, which is another company which has a little bit similar but different role than what we just heard from Grüner Strom Label. And it's my pleasure to have you on board. I should also say that I'm on the advisory board of EKOenergy, so it's also some personal relation in that involved. And it's my pleasure that you accept our invitation and that you can present to us a label which obviously works beyond Europe as well. That's also one reason why we're pleased to have you here on board. Stephen.
Thanks, Stefan. By the way, during your presentation, you twice fell away. So I don't know if it's my connection, which is unstable, or if it was on yours end. Anyway, if I would fall away, then just continue with the others. Thanks, yeah, thanks for the introduction and for the invitation. I brought my short presentation. Already from the invitation, I had the feeling that we are mixing concepts. So just to make sure that we talk about the same things, I wanted to start with the terminology slide. And already from the presentations that we have heard, I noticed that I'm missing several concepts still. But just to make sure that we talk about the same thing when we use the same words. When you talk about energy attribute certificates, or as they were called here by some REX certificates or guarantees of origin, they are all the same thing. Yeah, they are identity cards of electricity. And I would say, let's take a step back from what has happened 20 years ago when they were meant to be a subsidy system. In the last 15 years, there is no one who has claimed that they should be a subsidy system. Yeah, they are identity cards for electricity. They prove where the electricity comes from in the way that is described in the system, whether you are in favor or not, but it's an accepted way of proving where it comes from. Let's not give them more credits than what it is meant for. Also, when we refer to the European directive, there is nothing in the European directive which says that they should bring in money. Yeah? They are a proof for consumers that they consume renewable energy. So that's what we are talking about. Eva said guarantees of origin, that's the European name. In Germany, you call them Herkunftsnachweis. They are called REX in the USA, and sometimes they are called REX certificates in Europe still, because that was their name in 2001. But things continue to live a long life. That's one thing. What Eva presented is an ecolabel. That's not a certificate as such. Yeah, maybe at least we at EKOenergy is another one. Eva has shown this slide saying that there are so many of these labels around. I want to somehow, how would I say, frame this a bit. This is part of a study which is made by an agency which gets European money to make things look like complex. Yeah, the more complex things look like, the more money you can generate for a next study. So it's not true that there are many eco-labels around. If you define an eco-label as a third party, we are not a market player ourselves. We are a third party independent labeling organization. There are very few actually. In Germany, you have about 4 of them. There is OK Power, for example. In most countries, there is none, only EKOenergy, which is a Europe-wide or even a global eco-label. So we can operate anywhere where there is demand, where clients or consumers want to work with our label. We are very active in Germany, by the way, too. Just yesterday, Scott, for example, glass manufacturer made a deal, a PPA deal for about 200 gigawatt hours, and it will have our label too. So, and these things, but an eco-label is an independent addition on top. And I will tell about this addition. Eva has already told about their additional criteria with Grüner Strom. We also have these. So that's another thing. We are not a certificate. We don't prove the origin of the electricity. If you have renewable, well, you fulfill specific criteria, you can get our label. It's more like a diploma. I also added there, don't confuse with carbon offsetting certificates. It was good to hear that they have not been mentioned yet in this by the previous speakers, but I mentioned them because in the invitation for this workshop, it was meant that RECs are meant to generate money for developing countries. I've never heard such a thing. Yeah, so these are carbon offsetting. If you have a wind turbine in Indonesia, you can basically sell the carbon, whether you like it or not. If you don't like it, you don't have to buy it, but you can sell this carbon from this Indonesian wind turbine on the European market. And then the idea is you generate money for a wind turbine in Indonesia. We have nothing to do with that. I don't know that market very well, and I will not touch upon that further. One type of certificates I have forgotten to mention are then the old RECs certificates, in the sense that they are meant to generate. They are meant as a replacement of the feed-in. And they don't exist so in many countries anymore. Yeah, I think the Swedes were the last to have them. Their L certificates, which are not energy attribute certificates, which are not guarantees of origin. It's a different system, a national system. Subsidy systems work nationally in all countries. And in some of them, they are certificate based, but I assume let's not go into that detail because I don't know any remaining. The US still has that. The US still has certificate systems. But apart from that, I don't think the Swedes have them. I'm not an expert in that either. But just to get things clear, most of the discussion will probably go about energy attribute certificates today, but what Eva and me represent, we are ecolabels. And just to get to what Dörte said, that we need more PPAs. Well, that's very good. And what do we need to have to make people make a PPA? And that's the text from the PPA experts in Europe. They need a good guarantee of origin system, a good certificate system. And they don't mean a subsidy system. They mean, let us prove that what we buy is renewable. Because who wants to make a PPA for wind if no one will allow that you say you're using wind? You need to know, how can I prove that I'm using this wind? And not a system that I have agreed with my seller, but a system that will be accepted by the state, by other consumers, by other sellers. So that this is my wind. Give us such a system. That's what the PPA people are asking for. They ask for a good working guarantee of origin system in Europe. They ask for a good IREC working system outside Europe. They ask for a good REC system in the US. So let's not polarize. And let's also not add more qualities to the REC system. What it is meant to prove the identity. And what Eva is doing as an eco-label and what I'm doing as what we are doing here in Finland with the EKOenergy eco-label, we cannot do that if there is no way to prove that you have renewable. Yeah, and we don't prove it. We need a market system, and we come on top. So what is EKOenergy? EKOenergy is a global non-profit initiative. It's an initiative of the Finnish Association for Nature Conservation, but we thought we work on a global market. We also are in contact with large players. We need to be able to offer solutions that work worldwide. So we have created an initiative, a label, basically the same as Grüner Strom, but we work internationally. Our criteria have to work worldwide. And we did that in cooperation with NGOs from many countries, originally 30, but increasing. And we fulfill additional sustainability criteria, exactly in the same as what Grüner Strom has said. We ask additional things. And our label is a tool to prove additional positive impact. We want to do more. If it's not enough for you, you don't have to buy the label, it's fine. But we help you to do more. Yeah, and we also can prove very clearly what do we more. And that's what we do. And if you don't like it, you don't buy it. And if you like it, you can buy it. The EKOenergy label is internationally recognized. And now I will focus on what can we do more. Here you see some photos always as an intermezzo about what we do and how we work. We also got last year the European Citizens Prize from the European Parliament, by the way, for our work. And when we think about how can we do more, I refer to a the business leadership paper from the RE100 and the climate group and CDP, experts in the market, and they are also thinking, what can companies do more? And they have identified 5 fields where you can do more. And I will just quickly go into these 5 fields and tell you how EKOenergy label offers an option, not the option, maybe not even the best option, but a good option to do more. One of them is sustainability. It's not only about being 100% renewable, it's also about taking into account other aspects, amongst others, impact on nature. And that's where EKOenergy comes in with sustainability criteria. If you buy EKOenergy eco-labeled wind, it always comes from installations outside important bird areas. For example, if you buy EKOenergy labeled hydropower, it comes from dams with fish passages. So we come on top. We add additional criteria. And here you see one of these maps, which we check, European Natura 2000 areas. We go and check if your wind turbine you are buying EKOenergy from is not from one of these areas. The second field, what they have identified is ambition. How can you be more ambitious? Doing a bit more. And there again, EKOenergy comes in. We say companies, it's not enough that you do it in Germany only. You are buying from China and from Brazil. You have to think there with your suppliers. How can they switch to EKOenergy? And not, or to renewable energy. And not in 2030 or in 35. No, it's available now. You can do it now. We don't like it that a company commits to 100% renewable in 35. It's too late. Everyone will be renewable in 35. You have to move faster. And we offer them solutions. We sit down together with energy companies in Brazil and in other countries to think, what can we offer them now? What is available? There is where we come in. We help also companies to realize the sustainable development goals. So that's where we come in. And as I said, we are available worldwide, which helps us to tell to companies that they can move faster. If a company wants to switch to renewable energy, then we say, not only Germany, we are available in Australia and Argentina too. Go do it. Don't do it in 28. Do it now. It's available. Go for it. Impactful procurement is about additional impact. Same way as Grüner Strom, we also have a fund. I think if I'm well understood in Grüner Strom's case, the fund remains managed by the companies selling Grüner Strom, but correct me, Eva. In our case, the fund money is paid to us and we manage this as a fund. And once a year or twice a year, we select projects for financing. It's with the help of an independent jury. And our projects are not in the country of the sales of the renewable energy, but are explicitly meant to fight energy poverty in the developing countries. So we finance solar panels on schools, in off-grid villages, in hospitals, in by now about 30 countries worldwide. And all projects there again, the reference to the sustainable development goals, they help fight energy poverty, help fight hunger by having solar irrigation, solar cooled storages for food and stuff like that, help improve the health in off-grid villages by installing fridges working on solar energy where then vaccines can be stored. Yeah, here you see some examples. The fourth thing where you can do more as a company is influence. Now, not every company has the potential to call to politicians, to follow up legislation, to understand how this works, to write letters to ministers in another country to do more. And that's where we come in. We say to a company, if you buy EKOenergy, you help us promote renewable energy worldwide. We share information. We have information available. We, with our secretariat and with our network, we speak close to 20 languages. We get in touch with stakeholders. We encourage companies in China to switch to renewable energy too. We set up campaigns and so on. So that's everyone who buys EKOenergy supports us in that work. If you find this impressive, you can buy more renewable, you can support us more, you can convince your neighbor to switch to EKOenergy too. If you find this bullshit, then don't buy it. Yeah, fine. And here you see some of the things that enables us. Thanks to the consumers of EKOenergy, we get to conferences. Often we are the only environmental NGO in large conferences where we get the opportunity to speak about additional impact, about moving faster, about doing more, about speeding up the energy transition. And then the last point where you can do more and better is transparency. And then again, I think this invitation of this workshop was again not a very high example, a very good example of transparency and clear language. We talk about renewable energy. And how can we talk? Let's not mix all different concepts, because then we scare consumers rather than that we help them. And we have a package to help consumers and also energy companies to communicate in a correct way about renewable energy. And our label wants to be a tool in that communication. And we also say, what can you communicate, what can you not communicate? What is a good way to say and what is not a good way to say? Do not say zero carbon, please. Yeah. And yeah, if you want to know more about us, you can reach us out to us anytime. The website is quite obvious, ecoenergy.org. Where you find a lot of information, and I'm also available via email if you have any question. That's it from my side, but thanks again for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and I think your presentation already highlights why there is a need to have such exchange, and highlighting what are the differences. And we use the word certificates in a very different way of meaning. I mean, we're coming to that point again and again. You raised that question, how do certificates help to raise finance? And then you also answered it kind of, because you said how you are doing it, and somehow it's all related, whether you call it guarantee of origin or not. Anyway, a great thank you. Do we have any direct question for Stephen at the moment? That's not the case. And let me just mention, I saw an announcement from you that you've just announced a major PPA indeed, which obviously has a larger dimension, and it's just before our event. So what Dörte has said, PPAs are becoming more important, certainly will play a role in our discussion a bit later as well. Yeah, again, thank you. Then let me come to our next speaker, and it's my great pleasure to have a representative from science, Matthew Brander from University of Edinburgh. Matthew, you've been dealing with the different kind of ways of functioning of certificates, but I think it's better up to you now to give us an introduction of how you see the roles of certificates in the renewables market deployment. Matthew, a warm welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you see my slides okay?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Okay.
Just if you go to presentation mode, then
yes, of course. Okay. Do you have that okay? I assume that's displaying okay for you.
looks great. Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'll just give a little bit more background that's already been touched on to some extent, particularly looking at this issue from corporate level greenhouse gas disclosures and accounting, and the way in which certificates or energy attribute certificates are used within greenhouse gas accounting. I'll then talk a little bit about two interrelated problems of additionality, and then also the impact of non-additionality on the accuracy of greenhouse gas accounts. And I'll talk briefly at the end about two possible solutions to the problems that we have at the moment. So very brief background, and I assume most people are familiar with this. For corporate level greenhouse gas accounting, we have three scopes, and for scope 1, it's direct emissions from owned facilities and vehicles. Scope 2 is the point of generation emissions from purchased electricity and other forms of purchased energy, so steam, heating, and cooling. And scope 3 is effectively everything else in the value chain. And also, by way of brief background, the main international standard for corporate level greenhouse gas accounting at the moment by default is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And the current guidance from the GHG protocol is that companies should disclose 2 scope 2 numbers, so 2 numbers for purchased electricity. One using what's called a locational grid average method, which is just grid average emissions on the grid that you consume from. And the other is the market-based method, which allows the use of contractual arrangements, renewable energy certificates, whereby companies can buy certificates, they can buy attributes, and then report their emissions as 0 from purchased electricity. And I imagine that's fairly familiar to most people. And then also, by way of brief background, this is a very widespread practice. Over or around 2,000 companies reporting to CDP use the market-based method for reporting their emissions. Now, to come on to two problems with the current situation. The first is additionality. So this is this idea, well, does buying a certificate actually help to increase the amount of renewable deployment and therefore reduce emissions? If we're concerned about a transition and climate change mitigation, that is a key thing to be concerned about. When we buy a certificate, are we actually doing anything to reduce emissions? And from an academic or scientific perspective, I wanted to highlight that there's now a large body of published peer-reviewed academic literature, both in the US and for Europe, which has looked to see whether these voluntary certificate markets do drive additional renewable capacity. And at the moment, the evidence is that there is no or very limited evidence of additionality from these certificate markets. And I've included a link at the bottom of this slide to a web page that contains links to many more reports that also look at this issue and find the same results. And then relatedly, a second problem with certificates is when they're used to make claims within greenhouse gas accounts, effectively and arguably, they undermine the accuracy of the claims that are made by reporting companies. So if a company can report 0 emissions using the market-based method, a question arises, is that an accurate reflection of their emissions from purchased electricity? Now, those companies still consume power from the grid, and so they contribute to aggregate demand on that grid. And whichever technologies have to dispatch to meet aggregate demand, some of those in most grids will be fossil-based technologies, and there will be emissions. And because of the non-additionality issue, there's no causal relationship between the reporting company and renewable generation. So they haven't caused an increase in the amount of renewable generation. So they can't say, well, our emissions are 0 because although we consume on the grid, we caused additional renewables to be dispatched. So non-additionality interacts with accuracy of GHG accounts. And another issue, and I think Dörte mentioned this earlier as well, is that companies can use these certificates to report the fulfillment of their emission reduction targets. So the paper in Nature Climate Change was mentioned earlier. And yeah, as I won't go through it again, but that paper showed that a large proportion of the supposed emission reductions under science-based target setting aren't actually real reductions to the atmosphere. So that's hugely problematic. We have an accounting standard, an accounting practice, which allows companies to report that they have reduced emissions when they haven't reduced emissions. So that is a significant concern. And something else I wanted to flag up, and I think this has already been touched on to some extent, is that there is growing awareness of these problems. And that awareness has filtered through to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, who are now looking to revise their Scope 2 guidance to try to find solutions to this problem. So I've included a number of recent reports from the UK government, from the French Energy Agency. There's also been a large amount of media coverage in the UK, in Germany, certainly in Denmark as well, and also in the US, where the media are increasingly questioning the way in which companies are buying certificates and making these either emission reduction claims or zero emissions claims. And this was touched on earlier as well, the S&P Global coverage of this, but also quite a number of other financial analysts and data providers are increasingly questioning this corporate accounting practice, because what financial analysts want to know is their exposure to climate-related risk and opportunity. And what we're seeing is those analysts are looking at the market-based method and saying, well, this doesn't tell me anything useful about the true carbon intensity of these companies. If a company reports, I have zero emissions because I bought some certificates, that doesn't tell me that they really are zero carbon. It's just an accounting trick. And what analysts really want to know is real data on exposure to climate-related risk. And then, you know, that's talking about all the problems and awareness of the problems. And I wanted to finish up briefly with two potential solutions to these issues. As the GHG protocol looks at revising their Scope 2 guidance, two potential routes they could go down. One is for them to adopt the location grid average method only for reporting Scope 2 emissions, but then allow companies to report any reductions in emissions through supporting renewable projects using something like a consequential method or what's called project level accounting. So if a company does have an arrangement like with a PPA with a renewable generator, and their engagement did genuinely make that project happen and help to reduce emissions, they can then report that emission reduction alongside their Scope 2 or their Scope 1, 2, and 3 inventory. And another potential solution to these problems that we see is to continue to allow the use of the market-based method, but with an additionality requirement. And we have additionality requirements in other areas of practice. And essentially, it's about proving that the revenue from the sale of the REC or the contractual arrangement through the PPA made the project happen, and it otherwise would not have happened. So it's possible to introduce an additionality requirement. And that would then very much put the onus on proving additionality and supporting new renewables, which ultimately is what we need to do to mitigate climate change. So I hope that was useful, and I'm really happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for presenting not only your own research results, but kind of an overall picture of where we are and how important the additionality criterion is. I think that already came out before, but in particular now. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions? I see that there is a discussion going on in the meantime in the chat, answering some of the questions. Pleased about that. Do we have any questions from Matthew at this point of time?
I have a question. I cannot find the raising the hand. So I just step in.
Yes. Please.
Thank you, Matthew, and also Stephen, for the interesting presentations. I think it brings it already some clarity, at least for me, on some questions I had when I tried to get in more into this topic in preparation for my presentation. One was exactly this confusion with carbon offset certificates. I understand RECs are not carbon offset certificates, but I also understand that companies are allowed to report zero emissions. Does that concern only voluntary reporting programs, or is it also a mandatory reporting programs? For instance, I understand in Germany it's only the bigger and really energy intensive industry, like the big steel producers, for example, who are under the European ETS and are mandatory also to report and have clear mandatory targets to reduce their emissions, and they have a certain amount of allowances. So would the RECs, when they buy RECs and report zero emissions, would that also influence then their level of allowances? Or asked differently, would they be allowed to continue emitting when they buy RECs?
I can have a go at answering that, and please, if anyone else has a better answer, then please say. But as I understand it, the reporting under the European Emissions Trading Scheme is effectively for Scope 1 emissions. It's for the direct emissions from the steel plant.
Yes.
So if you are a facility under the EU ETS, you don't have to surrender allowances or certificates for your Scope 2 emissions. And that makes sense because power stations where the electricity is actually generated are also part of the EU ETS. So it's the coal-fired power station or the gas-fired power station that has to submit European emissions allowances to cover their emissions. The downstream consumer of that power then doesn't have to submit certificates or allowances again to cover those same emissions.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, those emissions will be covered twice. So it's point of generation emissions that are regulated under the EU ETS. And as I understand it, certificates, compliance, renewable energy certificates aren't part of that, that situation.
They are not, but there is another reporting, and in so far what Stefan says is not in the EU ETS directly, but we do have other reporting obligations, CSR obligations for big companies in the European Union, where part of that is also their energy mix situation and their CO2 situation. So there you do have the problem of greenwashing. Because that is then also because that's why also this investor relation agencies you quoted and I did quote, like Bloomberg or so, they definitely look into the validity and the credibility of a company, and there this question of energy supply plays a role.
Yeah, Stefan. I don't find the hand.
Stephen?
The hand?
Is it
Yeah.
Stephen?
Yeah, it's me. Sorry,
Please.
I can't switch on my video too.
Yes.
Just to answer to I think we have a lot of points already for discussion, but we will run out of time. So I will not open this. But just to answer to Stefan, what can be, when you have a regulated system, what is accepted for the system is in the regulation. I mean, there is no general rule. It's not up to the certificate system or whatever other system, how it can be used for others. It exists as a system. And then if someone else, and that's also one of the challenges, that there are a lot of different agencies working on different topics, and often not very compatible with each other. But that's how we have evolved, and we have to live with that. And usually, as far as I see, there is no relation between, on the one hand, the renewable energy certificates as a tracking tool, and then the use of them to avoid other obligations. And then apart from that, I agree completely with what Matthew already said. Yeah, it's a different scope. We talk about a different scope. If you burn coal, it's the large coal power plants, the large emitters, the chemical industry. I mean, obviously, they cannot offset. It's not an offsetting system, with certificates. Certificates is to prove that the electricity that you buy from the grid is renewable. So it's not meant to somehow compensate the emissions that, as Matthew calls them, and they are called scope 1 emissions that come from your own chimney. So in that case, again, sense, there is not that much overlap with the ETS. But again, as there is no general answer, as many systems as you have to check the rules. And if it's mandatory, then it's every single point and comma will be ruled and explained how you have to calculate. And if they accept certificates, okay. And if they don't accept certificates, they must have their reason for it. But we have seen in the past often that, and that's also one of the reasons why there are many certificates, that every single administration and organization develops something and not always very compatible with each other. I gave the overview of certificates in the beginning of my presentation. It's true, ETS was even missing. That's another one. That's not even offsetting, that's emission trading. It's another type of certificate, but they are all easily mixed, yeah, on the market. I have seen green electricity products where you compensate the emissions with emission trading. Luckily, no longer possible on the European market, but not so long ago it was possible. And maybe that's the last comment I want to make to what several people have used the word greenwashing here. Let's not make this mistake about all the time calling ourselves and our green energy initiatives and those who do something. Let's not call them greenwashing. Yeah? The people behind the big fossil man are laughing behind our back. Yeah, they call fossil gas natural gas, and no one of us even comments on it. Yeah, they have all these nice names for their fossil products. Think of
oh, yes, we do.
How
EREF
many
does.
names? And these we have to target. Yeah. They're just laughing while we think about what can be green, and is mine a bit greener than yours, and is there enough additionality? They continue to sell fossil fuels in all possible names and completely irregulated, and none of us ever comments on that.
But Stephen, I don't think that we are about here to call each other greenwashers. That's not the point here. What we tried to get is a better understanding, and I think the discussion here, which is a quite I don't want to call it heated, but a very engaged one, shows us that there is a need. And I personally missed the discussion because there was not so much discussion about how these things are related. And the main purpose of why we arranged this meeting and the discussion, it's certainly not the end, but the beginning, is how can we indeed practically support deployment of renewables? Let's not forget about that. That is where we all agree. And no one here is blaming anyone else here, at least so far, I think, to do greenwashing. That's certainly not the point. But I'm pleased about having this discussion here. It shows it's really important and necessary. And let me now go to our next speaker. And it's my pleasure to have here Anne Fernqvist from the United Nations Development Program. And we've had discussions to set up this webinar before we invited others. Anne, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here. You told me that from your angle, it's more kind of the perspective of the kind of buyer and how to support, not so much in being in part of setting standards or everything. It's my pleasure to welcome you, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Good morning from New York. Let me try to pull up my presentation. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
If you go to presentation mode, then it's even better. Now we still see what's around you.
Where do I do that?
Just at the bottom, a bit more to the right, at the bottom, a little bit more to the right. It looks like a screen, this one, yes.
Okay,
super.
Great, learned something. Yes, my name is Anne Fernqvist. I manage the Corporate Sustainability Program at the United Nations Development Program in New York. It's the largest UN agency working in over 120 countries. So while this is only one end user perspective, it is a quite global one and might give you a little bit of a global snapshot on what the issue is from my perspective. I'm not a green energy expert. I'm a corporate greening expert. So let me just dive into that. As we've heard already, voluntary climate commitments are on the rise. We now have 70% of the global economy committing to some sort of net zero game, climate neutrality target. It's no longer for the Googles and the Microsofts and the Unilevers of this world. This has really arrived everywhere, also in the public sector, also in the small and medium-sized businesses. And with that comes certain challenges, because not everyone can sign PPAs. For instance, in the public sector for UN agencies, it's quite challenging to do so. For smaller businesses, it's quite challenging to do so. But really, two examples I thought were funny, that, you know, and demonstrate that this has, corporate climate commitments have arrived everywhere, are that both Philip Morris and the Church of England have climate neutrality and net zero targets. Okay. So for the United Nations Development Program, we, as I said, we operate in 120 countries with over 800 facilities. And we have made a commitment to reduce our carbon footprint in line with the Paris Agreement by 50% by 2030, and continue to be climate neutral via offsetting. And I won't talk about offsetting. I know it's a different thing. So my focus is really on how do we achieve the 50% reduction by 2030. And 2030 is like tomorrow. In our case, we have developed different strategies on how to reach the 50% target. And one of them is, it's a reality, we can only achieve it if we reduce energy consumption in our facilities by 55%. Now we're talking facilities everywhere, including headquarters in New York, all the way through, you know, warehouses in Sudan. So it's a very diverse portfolio of facilities that we have, but yeah, we need to reduce by 55% to get there. Now, the challenge is that we do not work in vacuum. This, you know, and I think every greening focal point, corporate sustainability program has to fight hard for every dollar they get to, and rightfully so, to achieve reductions. So you need to look at all the different options that are on the table to achieve these 55% reductions in our case. And what we do invest in our own projects and our facilities, whereas other UN agencies buy RECs or buy some sort of green energy. Not all of them, but many of them. And I just wanted to present a bit of you know, data that we have seen from our own projects. We have done over 60 renewable energy projects, energy efficiency projects in UNDP facilities globally. And we invest, or we focus our resources on where they have the greatest impact for greening. So we look at cost effectiveness in the sense of how much money do we need to invest to achieve 1 ton of reduction. So across all of our PV projects, our solar projects, we need to invest $1,380 per achieved ton of reduction. For energy efficiency, it's a little bit better, it's 823. But of course, if you go to management and you present that and say, you know, give me $1,380 so I can, for every ton that we need to reduce, they will tell you, well, how about you buy RECs and, you know, you spend $66 per ton. It's very, very, very difficult to make this case. Over the average of 8 years, it looks a little bit better. Because of course, renewable energy you have to buy every year, whereas investments in actual tangible local solutions, you know, you only make once and then you benefit from them. So they're the relationship between the two solutions is looking much better already. Still, especially in the public sector, 8 years is a very long time. It's very, very hard to make that case. It does look significantly better when we factor in cost savings. So over 8 years, in our experience with our global data, investing in solar energy actually saves you $175 per ton reduced, energy efficiency $146 per ton, whereas of course for renewable energy via certificates, you need to keep on paying. So this is the argument that I use and that, you know, has been helpful in in getting the money to invest in our properties to actually reduce our carbon footprint. But I really have to say, in every facility where we look at, and especially where we are co-hosted with other UN agencies or other developmental partners, it's every time a struggle to make the case for actual reductions when there is the very cheap, very convenient, very quick opportunity of just buying green energy. You know, and I hear every year, oh, why have we made so little? Why have we only reduced by 8%? Whereas, you know, the UN headquarters, the Secretariat in New York, you know, has reduced by 80%. Well, guess what? Because they just simply buy green electricity and have not done anything else. So, yeah, this is just to give you a little end user perspective on how green energy is really a challenge for me in supporting the United Nations and also private sector companies in the past in making the transition to a lower carbon corporate future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. And it may come as a surprise for some of our colleagues here that you, as UNDP, present yourself here as a kind of end consumer, and that you are trying to find better ways of kind of greening or making your portfolio more renewable, which I think also answers some of the concerns that, Stephen, that you have, because we want to find indeed practical ways of answers to such challenges that not only UNDP, but certainly also companies, national companies, local companies are facing as well. Yeah, do we have questions for Anne or comments? If that's not the case, oh, there is one. Matthew, please.
Oh, thanks. Only really a comment. Yeah, I was going to say it is really interesting to see your example of this potential distraction effect from RECs, where companies, and this comes back to the accounting problem, companies look at their abatement options and they might be misled into thinking, well, I'll buy, you know, the cheap REC because it makes my accounts look like there's a reduction, when in actual fact a lot of the evidence shows that there's no additionality and therefore no real reduction in emissions. And I don't know, I mean, maybe when you're speaking to your investment committee or your managers, I mean, that's potentially a point to make, that although these certificates may look like a reduction when you apply a market-based method, if you were to use an actual consequential or project accounting method, in all likelihood it would show that there was no additional renewables and therefore no reduction in emissions.
Yeah.
Stephen, I see you raised your hand as well. Please.
Yeah, do we already start the discussion, by the way, or is there still other speakers? Sorry for
we have one more speaker, and then we have the time for the discussion.
Okay, and do we have 1 hour, or I don't know about the timing.
We were planning till 15:30, but as we started late, I would suggest that we continue.
Just very quickly, then reaction. Sorry, then quickly reaction. I think again that Matthew sees a little bit too pessimistic. I think we can learn a lot from Anne's presentation. Also, we can learn that indeed for companies it is confusing. They easily mix offsetting and see a REC certificate as an offsetting tool, and that's a bit how it sounded, and that's not how it should sound. Yeah. In the end, it helps a lot if we talk about renewable energy. Does the company or the end consumer wants to use renewable energy or not, away from offsetting and carbon? I seldom talk about carbon, and I seldom talk about, it's about energy security, it's about access to renewable energy, it's about promoting this idea of 100% renewable. And if we need that, then they will need a certificate in one way or another, because otherwise they cannot prove it. Unless we throw away everything we have and we set up a completely new system. But in the American market and in the European market, there is no other way to prove than having a certificate. Well, what additional criteria you set, it's up to you. Grüner Strom is an example of additional criteria, but you need it. But it's about renewable, and let's not always talk about certificate. You want renewable, and the technology or the reasoning behind it, that doesn't matter that's technical thing. It's for your energy company, for your sustainability consultant to prove that. And then also there, I think Anna also raised it. It sounds cheap in the beginning, yeah, for 1 year, but when you have to pay them every year, and the price is very unpredictable, yeah. On the international market, the certificates, the price has increased together with the energy crisis from 50 cents per megawatt hour to €5 almost, yeah, in 1 year time. I want to see the companies who continue to do that without looking for other investment opportunities and for long-term commitments. So I see a lot of potential there, a lot of potential. Let's grasp and let's focus on the potential, and let's not focus on the things that don't go 100% as it should be.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I see Dörte, and I would just wanted to say I wanted to extend that we continue until, well, Central European 15:45, if that's okay. I know that Eva has to leave a bit earlier, so I would, after Dörte, give her the opportunity before we go to the next speaker. Maybe she wants also to make some remarks before she has to leave. Dörte, and then if she wants, Eva, and then we go to Stefan, our last speaker. Dörte, I think you're still muted. Yeah.
I don't think, Stephen, it's about having a good follow-up scheme that you as a consumer or as an industry know if you buy additional renewable electricity, where it comes from. That's for sure. We are talking here about tradable green certificates, which is in effect a different type. And this tradable green certificates or tradable CO2 emission certificates, they're living in themselves, and they create obstacles to the offtake of renewables in many cases. And that was the issue also what Anne said. So only in that respect, I think we have to say greenwashing, as we have to say fossil gas is greenwashed if you say natural gas. That's the same issue. It's actually, in my view, also the same interest group behind. So that is, I don't want to be bothered with, or I don't want to dilute the criticism which now is really all encompassing on the emission trading and the green certificate schemes with good guarantees of origin. Like I like my good guarantees of origin of wine which comes from a specific region. That's a complete different story, and that's a nice story. That's okay, because not everybody can in his or her vicinity produce the renewable electricity or knows the wind park if they are not fortunate enough to be with good electricity providers like Westfalenwind or others. But yeah, I think we should not confuse things here.
Thank you, Dörte. Then I would invite Eva, if you want to make some final remarks before you have to leave. You, of course, feel free to stay with us longer, but
no, I prefer to hear what Mr. Lackmann says, and then I'm just going to head off.
Good. Thank you. Just wanted to give you the opportunity. Then it's my pleasure to come to the last speaker of today's session, Steffen Lackmann from the company Westfalenwind. And I think, Stefan, I've already understood from the question that you've raised that you kind of come from a very kind of on the ground perspective. You're doing what needs to be done, investment on the ground, supplying electricity, and you are kind of getting an understanding of how this kind of on the top down approaches do work. And I think the big question is, how can we combine and connect and create the best synergies between those kind of top-down frameworks with what's actually happening on the ground? And we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Great, perfect. Yeah, I suppose everybody's now really curious to hear what renewable energy certificates mean for the implementation on the ground and the growth in renewables. Yeah, in Europe or in Germany in particular. I think it's no spoiler when I'm saying already now that we are very critical towards RECs. We think they're rather hindering our work anyways, as you can see here on this slide. We, at least in our region, were very successful in bringing the renewable energy transition forward. This is a picture from our region, Paderborn, where our company is based. And this here is the community of Lichtenau. It reached, it got a bit famous because it's the community with, I think, the highest density of wind power plants, and it has at the same time a very high acceptance among the community and the people living there. So this development that you saw on the first slide took already place in the early 1990s, when the first wind park, actually the first wind park of the entire federal district of North Rhine-Westphalia was built in our region. The development continued, and it was more and more people being involved in the local wind power business. And in 2009, then our company Westfalenwind was founded, basically as a consolidation of experienced and key actors in the local wind energy business, with the understanding that together they can achieve much more. Today, Westfalenwind has more than 80 employees. Our core business is still wind power. That includes the planning, maintenance, and the operation of the wind parks. We do the same with photovoltaic. We have very innovative business ideas like Westfalenwind IT, where we are using the space in the towers of windmills to run data centers, because I mean, there is a lot of space, there is a really good internet connection, and we bring processes that are very energy intensive directly to the source of renewable energies. And then lastly, we have our own electricity distribution. Since approximately 6 or 7 years, the main idea of this, or the main goal really is to generate acceptance and provide affordable electricity to those who are living close to the wind parks. So we are convinced that acceptance can only be generated if communities and citizens have the possibility to participate. We are doing that, for example, by establishing foundations. We always try to ensure broad participations among the people living around wind parks. We try to leave as much as added value as possible in the communities that are affected, for example, by ensuring that the business taxes remain in the communities. And what I said before, becoming more and more the most important tool for us to generate acceptance is our electricity distribution, which is promoted and financed directly through our wind parks, and we are able to reduce electricity prices in average between 2 and 7 cents per kilowatt hour. For instance, in one part of our region, in a village or small town, we have the cheapest household tariff in Germany with 20 cents. Basically, we are giving the electricity for free to the people living there, because it's really a lot of windmills being operated in that area. The only thing they are paying are fees, for example, for the grid. Yeah, our success in figures, we have now approximately 720 megawatts of installed wind power, 248 megawatt of installed PV power. And that means we have by now a share of 100% of renewable energies of the total electricity demand in the district of Paderborn, which is something we are really proud of. Yeah, this is a bit more in detail how our electricity supply works. On the left side you see how it's commonly done. The electricity suppliers providing green electricity usually buy the electricity from the stock market. It's a mix of renewables, nuclear and fossil electricity. And they make it green by simply buying RECs, for example, from hydrogen power projects from Norway. And then they sell it as green electricity to their customers. We are doing it differently. We are supplying the electricity from our renewable energy plants directly to our customers. And we have selected trading partners. We are selling the surplus of electricity to when we have a surplus. And on the other hand, when we have a gap, for example, when there is no wind and no sun, we are also buying the electricity from our trading partners in order to be able to ensure a reliable supply of electricity to our customers. We are Grüner Strom certified. This label is really important for us in the sense of marketing, because for us it was difficult in the past to explain to our customers why our electricity is green, because in Germany it's the case that most of our projects are promoted through in the framework of the renewable energy law, and when projects receive this promotion, they are not allowed to issue the renewable energy certificates, because this promotion is paid by the customers through a cost allocation. And that means that the regs are kind of automatically accounted to those who are paying for it through this cost allocation. So for us, it was then, as I said, difficult to explain why our electricity is green when we have no regs. So this Grüner Strom label really helps us to market our electricity as green. Getting closer to the meaning of regs for the transition to renewables in Germany and the initial question. In 2019 in Germany, it was 100 terawatt hours of green electricity traded outside this framework of the renewable energy law, which is almost as much as the entire wind power generation in that year. And still the transformation to the renewables goes very slow. So why is that? I think we heard the answer already. For the industry and electricity suppliers, from a purely economical point of view, it makes most sense to just buy the gray electricity mix from the stock market and combine it with cheap renewable energy certificates. If you see here if you look at here at this figure, this is the development of the electricity prices at the stock market over the last years. And the red figures here is the average awarded price for wind power. And as you can see, it's the prices on the stock market for the gray electricity mix are much lower. So as I said, it makes more sense to buy the gray electricity and then add it with cheap renewable energy certificates. So for the individuals, it's a system that is not transparent at all, and they don't support more renewable energy projects in their region. So individuals don't understand why there needs to be a wind park outside their village if their electricity is green already. And for the industry, it means they have no pressure to support the development of renewables locally. I think a clear indicator for that is that there is really an absence of renewables in industrial areas, although industrial areas really constitute many times a great site for developing renewable energies. The situation is changing at the moment. At the moment, we see a great shift. since the prices, the electricity or the energy prices increased last year. So you see here now the prices on the stock market actually exceed the awarded prices for wind power. So we have more and more, especially very energy intensive industries approaching us and ask us whether we can supply energy, electricity to them. We think it's a really great opportunity because having industrial partners on our side, we believe it's a really strong driver to increase the acceptance for renewable energy projects, because basically for the industry, it's a location factor, it's about jobs. But the big question is whether we can rely on the market prices and what will happen when the prices go down again. Will the industry then continue to support renewable energy projects in their area? So what needs to change? I don't have the detailed solution, obviously, but I think what we need is a physical connection between electricity and RECs. So that means those who purchase the electricity may also be allowed to claim the certificates. At least it shouldn't be allowed that the RECs and the electricity is traded separately, and RECs are traded from countries where like Norway, where there's not even a physical connection through an electricity grid. Ideally, we have subnational local emission factors, so location-based accounting, as we heard before from Matthew. So really based on the electricity that's coming from the grid. In our opinion, that would automatically imply that there is a spatial connect between industry and the jobs and renewables. And then obviously, as a general point, we need incentives to build renewable energy facilities, and especially for companies, they need simplified approval processes. Yeah, and then probably we need to address country-specific accounting rules. I mean, that's what my question before to Matthew was also addressing. I must admit I'm not into these specific rules, but yeah, my question was what role RECs play in the compensation of emissions. I think I have more clarity now. But what are also the accounting rules in future when renewable energy projects are receive a promotion through, for example, a law like the Renewable Energy Law in Germany? So I leave it with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I think this perspective of your very practical perspective as someone who is producing power is very, very valuable. And I think your last point we should not neglect. This is the overall market design for electricity, which obviously at the moment is rather favorable for renewables because of the high spot market prices, which are, well, offering remuneration which is far above what the generation cost is. But we know that when we looking in the kind of the longer term market development, it will certainly not stay as it is. So how can we find a reasonable way of long-term investment security for the investors and long-term low electricity prices for the consumers? And at the end of the day, the question is, which role can guarantees of origin and renewable energy certificates play in all this? This is, if I may summarize now the discussion that we're having today. But if I may now ask if anyone has a question for Stefan. Stefan.
I might have.
Yes, please, Stephen.
it's a remark and a question. So I think Stefan pointed correctly out, in Germany, you do not get guarantees of origin or Herkunftsnachweisen for your subsidized renewable energy. They go into this mix. So you cannot prove renewable. So he was admitting that he has an issue there. So there's where I say everyone, or where we think everyone who produces should be able to claim and should get this identity card. So that's one discussion, but every country always makes things a little bit more complex. So in Germany, you don't get them. And then I was a bit intrigued by his remark. So we had to find a way around it. And that's, I think, where then double counting comes in. If different systems exist, you don't get the guarantee of origin, so you find a way around it. Maybe we don't have time to go into detail, but I can already see that this is, if you don't give everything a REC, if you don't give a common system where everyone has the same identity card and which is given with neutral criteria, you produce it, you get it, and then you can prove it, then people find a way around, and then you create double counting, because then you have a REC certificate and you find a way around, and you find another way around, and there I see dangers as well. And I'm very sure that in Stefan's case and with the help of Grüner Strom, it's done very well. But what if everyone finds ways around? That's not how the market is supposed to work. And there is where REC can play a positive role. And again, not to promote renewable, but to be able to say that you have it, and to be able to tell to consumers that you have it. And that's what REC is meant for.
Yeah, Stephen. So we obviously need some adjustments. What you're saying now is that the national system of Germany has some problems that should be adjusted. I think we are now really at a turning point anyway, because with the market prices as they are, there's no subsidy, whatever you call it. Actually, there is no subsidy with the feed-in tariff. But anyway, there is no support, no additional support necessary because the market prices are so high. Anyway, we don't know what the long-term development will be, because we have that on days when there's a lot of sun and wind. Sometimes still now it can happen negative prices, which is of course a total market failure. So obviously there's it needs to be go much deeper, what we have to change, and how do we need to connect or disconnect with these guarantees of origin. I would like to ask this question to Matthew, for as a neutral person. What do you think about Stephen's comments and disconnecting the value and those, because that is what obviously keeps in the Stefan's case the market back. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of my presentation, I had one slide with two possible solutions, and I think I think they are two. I think they're two possible solutions. I think either you, from an accounting point of view, you don't use RECs to make greenhouse gas to report within an inventory. But if you have entered into some kind of contractual arrangement or done something as the procuring company, so it could be buying a certificate, or it could be entering into a PPA with certificates. If you've done something that actually materially causes more renewables to happen, and I can imagine that being the case in the examples that Stefan gave, then you report the reduction in emissions that you've caused through that action. So I think that's one possible solution. And the other one is to have, much like the current market-based accounting approach, you have a trade in certificates, but you have an additionality requirement attached to them. So you only issue a certificate if you have proof of additionality. And I guess it is quite a kind of fundamental point. I think part of the root problem that we have without an additionality requirement is well, the problems that Stefan described. It's cheap to buy the brown stuff and just buy a non-additional certificate and make a claim, and then that undermines the market for genuinely additionally supporting renewables. And so, as well as not helping to support renewables. The current situation also leads to these problematic, misleading claims where companies can say, I used renewables, but they didn't actually physically use renewables, and they didn't actually cause additional renewables. So there's no physical relationship to the claim, and there's no causal relationship to the claim. And that's the thing that gets called out by the media and gets called out by financial analysts, because increasingly people just don't believe it. So
that's where your proposal comes in with the more localized approach. Is that?
Stefan's suggestion of a more localized approach. I think that's it. Yeah, I mean, I'm supportive of a more localized approach as well. Typically within greenhouse gas accounting, whether it's electricity or buying recycled paper, typically you would always try to report the actual product that you've consumed. And you would try to do that in the most disaggregated way possible. So if you know you bought paper from Scotland, for example, then you would report that rather than say the average emissions for paper from the UK or from Europe. So any kind of localization or disaggregation is an improvement in accuracy.
It would be an incentive for, I mean, what we need, a decentralized, it's decentralized wind farms, solar panels, etc. So to create an incentive for those communities, whatever it is, regions, cities, that they can kind of get more benefit, if I understand that correctly, from really building the wind farms, maybe against some of the people. Maybe that's something we should indeed think more about it. And we're coming to the end if I look at the time, and I know that some of you have commitments. So if I may give a final round to everyone, that we can kind of not come to a final solution now, but I look forward to continuing this discussion. But looking at Dörte, would you like to make some final remarks now?
No final remark, but I think, again, as I said before, it's urgently needed to get the house in order. And we have some assets which we learned about, local additionality. I'm wondering now, actually, if we cannot facilitate the work a bit online with Matthew to look into the environmental auditing rules and the ISO procedures under environmental auditing rules, and have there the real accounting. I bought my electricity so and so many renewable, and if it's a local value, then I have this local certificate or origin, which is not tradable. It's just a bookkeeping or a proof point. That's probably helpful, but that's the extent of it, I would say.
If I may continue, Stephen, you ever thought about having in the way you do it? I know you do great work with the projects in particular that you support in the developing countries. I know those projects. What's your kind of impression of having a more kind of localized approach, making that part of a guarantees of origin, whatever you want to call it, certificate system?
I would say it's almost the topic for a next discussion. I would like to play the ball back. It's very interesting, this localization. And by the way, that's what consumers are asking for. Also with EKOenergy, 95% is very local, because someone who wants to do something more often, it is already included in their mind that they want to do something local. And also on international level, there is no such a thing as very international trade. Yeah, this Norway, Germany thing, which we all the time hear, is a very German problem, yeah, and a Dutch problem. At the international level, most people consume from their own countries. IREX have to be used within the same country. So let's not export, let's not, as we often do, export German problems to the rest of the world. Yeah, if you have a problem, solve it yourself, but don't involve the rest of the world with it. But it's a very local thing. It's one issue, yeah, this localization. Then you have the whole discussion, which is now going on at 24/7. How do you prove at any given time, which is another dimension? It's not only local, but it also has to be proven 24/7. also an element that is not covered by the current guarantees of origin, but which can come on top. But then, for example, Stefan might be already in problem that all his local wind turbines are at some points of the year not able to deliver wind. And he cannot answer. Give an answer to the questions, to the request of people who are 24/7. And at EU level, there are now circulate now things that the GO should be at time based with a maximum of 1 hour time frame. I don't know who invents such things. Yeah, if everyone sees the things from their perspective, then we don't solve anything, but we export our problems to the rest of the world. What we need is a basic system that works, and we have that. And everyone who wants to build on top can do that. Yeah, I think Stefan has just proven that an amazing model works within the current market. Let's promote these good things more. If someone wants to do more, they can use EKOenergy. Yeah? They can tonight they can make an EKOenergy agreement. So let's not always focus on what does not work. Let's focus on the many challenges that we have and on the solutions that exist. So let's not, I do absolutely not agree with it, but that we need to rebuild the whole system, nothing works. This is not true. There are a lot of working models and we can make everything work tomorrow if we want, but let's not be distracted by the points and the commas.
Yeah, thank you. I do disagree that this is a German problem or discussion. I mean, the way we discussed here shows us that it is not. And I could tell you from my work, you know, I have members in more than 100 countries.
German, Norway.
I know that I'm working in more than, I have members in more than 100 countries, that this discussion and the problem of where to kind of locate renewables is not something German, Norwegian, but it happens everywhere now. Wherever you have, for example, introduction of auctions, you have this unbalanced way of certain places only have renewables and others don't have any more. But anyway, I think we have an international, although more, of course, European-centric discussion at the moment. We've had an important remarks here from Pakistan, which shows that also we are obviously also touching some of these discussions which are taking place outside Europe. I would like now UNDP ask you, Anne, you have also the global, although you are, I think, originally from Europe, the global angle. Has this discussion been helpful for you, how to kind of improve that situation? And can you maybe not now, but later come up with proposals what you would need to make it even better?
I mean, clearly this discussion has helped me to understand certain differences better, and that's just the first step. It's a very complex issue. I think my conclusion on my proposal is less from my UNDP perspective and more from the perspective that I've worked with a lot of companies, both in Europe, but also, and really everywhere in the world, as well as in the US, on helping them to, you know, set up climate strategies, making climate reduction goals, and, you know, looking into renewable energy options. And one thing that I see, and I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of this, in the US, you have location-based emission factors. So you have regional, sub-regional emission factors. So if I work with a company in New York and I calculate their carbon footprint from electricity consumption, they would not be happy to apply the emission factor from the American grid. They want the Northeastern US grid emission factor. And I think this is a really important strategy to increase competition among regions, because there is such a renewable energy acceptance problem still. I know it from Germany, it's the same here in the US. So I think that needs to be part of a discussion and part of a solution is regional emission factors to increase competition and to award those companies that do produce where renewable energy exists, award them with better climate balances and carbon footprints.
Thank you very much, Anne. Indeed, we are not at the end of the discussion. Stefan, I would like you for some final remarks for today. What's your main takeaway?
Just to briefly react to Stephen, just to clarify that misunderstanding, on my last slide, I didn't say that we need a regional approach limited to a region like a district like Paderborn, that we're saying we need 100% of renewables, wind power, and that's what we are supplying to our industry, and we are kind of living isolated. Grids are international. We need to have the trade across countries. That's important to stabilize the grid. That's important to also have a continuous supply of renewables across regions, but there needs to be a physical connection. My final remark for today is that I think we are really living in an extremely exciting time at the moment. The energy crisis, I think, is a really great opportunity for renewables to demonstrate that they are really the cheapest source of energy. And we really shouldn't miss this opportunity. And it's at the moment only the electricity or the energy prices, but I think the whole discussion about greening and greenhouse gas emissions really should go in the same direction and help us. And without understanding it, how it works, the whole accounting in detail, my takeaway is that it's too complex for sure. And it needs to be easier. It needs to be, the link needs to be clearer between, the source of energy and where it's needed and where it's accounted.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan. I would say that these are the final words for today. I would say thank you so much for really a very lively debate, for really excellent presentations from all of you, excellent experts, and also for good interventions from our audience. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is broadcasted and will be available. It's already available on Facebook. It will be available in our YouTube channel. Certainly, this is not the end of the debate, and we will certainly kind of reconnect and see what we do with the discussions of today. From my side, thank you very much again. And let me also thank you, the webinar partner, which makes it possible for us to have these webinars free of charge for everyone, Profegventus. Thanks a lot for all our speakers here, for all your contributions. And I wish you a nice day, nice evening, wherever you are. Stay healthy, stay safe, and see you again. Bye-bye.